Welcome. I'm Jim Marone, director of the Taubman Center, and on behalf of Brown University and the Taubman Center, I'd like to welcome you to this joint session of Taubman Center and Rhode Island Public Radio. We've had a lot of conversation and discussion about the stadium. Someone was saying to me today, boy, I've been involved in a lot of stadium conversations, but none so feisty as Rhode Island's. And I had to remind him what we Rhode Islanders all know, that Rhode Island was the first state to vote for independence, the only state to vote on the Constitution, and we voted it down. The last state to finally accept the Constitution after George Washington had been elected and had been in office for 4 months. We finally caved in, which is all to say we are a lively and feisty place that loves lively and feisty conversations. With apologies to the panel, let me do just a very quick and non-scientific poll. Before we go in, we want to do a before and after perhaps. So for the before, I'm going to ask you by voice vote, we are on radio, about whether you are undecided, against no matter what, or leaning for the stadium in Providence. Are you ready? Those of you by voice vote who are undecided or willing to have your minds changed, undecided, say aye. Aye. Ooh, pretty good. Those of you who are just plain all-out opposed, say aye. Aye. I see it. And those of you who are all for it, say aye. Aye. Oh, very nice. In the spirit of Rhode Island. Let me just say again what a pleasure it is to have you here and to partner with Rhode Island Public Radio. Welcome to Brown. We'll have a very lively discussion. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I am Donnis. I'll be your moderator. I ask you to be respectful during this forum. We want to have a vigorous discussion without interruptions from our audience, and there will be an opportunity for audience questions at the very end of the 1-hour forum. In addition, we encourage you to tweet using the hashtag #PawSoxForums, and we're about ready to get going. The Pawtucket Red Sox are about as Rhode Island as calamari, coffee milk, and Scarborough Beach. But the team's future was cast into uncertainty when the Paw Sox beloved owner, Ben Mondor, died in 2010. A new ownership group bought the Paw Sox in February of this year. 2 months later, in April, the Paw Sox unveiled a request for taxpayers' help to build a new 10,000-seat ballpark on part of the former I-195 land in Providence. The team asked for $120 million in state lease payments and a 30-year tax exemption on Providence property taxes. The request sparked a mostly negative public reaction, and Governor Gina Raimondo responded by calling for the Paw Sox to revise their proposal. These are some of the issues we'll be discussing during a public forum this evening at Brown University's Taubman Center. I'm Rhode Island Public Radio political reporter Donnis, and I'd like to introduce our panel. On the right side is Dr. Charles Steinberg. He's Executive Vice President of the Boston Red Sox and Senior Advisor to Red Sox CEO and Paw Sox Managing Partner Larry Lucchino. Dr. Steinberg is known as the maestro who brings the magic to special events at Fenway Park, like when the Red Sox have been celebrating World Series championships. He's also worked for the Baltimore Orioles, the San Diego Padres, the Los Angeles Dodgers, and Major League Baseball. In the center here is Victor Matheson, a professor of economics at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. He specializes in sports economics, particularly the economic impact of big sporting events on host cities. Professor Matheson has provided analysis to dozens of media outlets, including Rhode Island Public Radio. And in the interest of full disclosure, I have to tell you that he's a Minnesota Twins fan, although he says he doesn't like the New York Yankees. And next to me is Jack Robbins, a principal with FX Fowl Architects in New York. As an architect and urban designer, Jack works with public and private clients worldwide in an attempt to create vibrant, sustainable cities. He's got degrees from Harvard and Yale, so he's no stranger to New England. Also was involved in a study on the jewelry district, and he's in a mixed marriage. His wife is a Red Sox fan, while Jack is a Yankees fan, and they're fighting for the future fandom of their 5-year-old son. So let's have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. Dr. Charles Steinberg, why don't you start with an update? Give us a brief synopsis of the Paw Sox proposal for Providence and where things stand now.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. You know, when you had the three groups give their eyes, when early on in my career, I was in that middle group, not the undecided. I was dead set against it. You know, I was from Baltimore, and the last thing we wanted was a new owner who came in saying that we would have a new ballpark and that my home, Memorial Stadium, would have to give way to something new. Only because I now have the zeal of the convert by having seen what Oriole Park at Camden Yards did, not only for Baltimore and Maryland and for all of Major League Baseball and for so many cities, do I come to you with more of that perspective. My work at the Red Sox hasn't been on this project. And in fact, there was a change that you're all familiar with when we lost Jim Skeffington a few weeks ago. That was a real, it was a tragedy. It brought a lot of sadness, but as we came to terms with our grief, it also changed the dynamic, and it thrust Larry Lucchino much more into the Rhode Island dynamic, whereas that was so much Jim Skeffington's expertise. So there's really a fresh start as far as participation by a lot of us, and a new beginning. Some of the numbers that you mentioned before in what had previously been discussed, you know, probably take those and set them aside and look at a new, a fresh, a different negotiation, a renegotiation of the agreement. I know this, that with Larry Lucchino and all I've heard about the governor, you know, you'll have a good and vigorous and fair outcome. So that's the perspective I come from with the Red Sox, having been in Baltimore and in San Diego.
Dr. Steinberg, it sounds like there's a very different proposal being offered by the Paw Sox now to state officials. Can you get into any specifics on how the proposal has changed and what, if any, public subsidy is being requested?
Well, I'm not your numbers guy, and I guess I'm sorry I'm not, but I'm not too sorry that I'm not a finance or accounting guy. We have a wonderful guy, Jeff White, who's here with us if we get to questions that do need answers. But I think we start with the vision. Let's start with the idea of what would be good. What would be good? Right now, if you live in Pawtucket and you go to McCoy, you've enjoyed that experience. Actually, if you live in southern Massachusetts, you've done that. In fact, 48% of the fans who go there come from out of state. But let's take a look at an idea and begin a public discussion of the merits of what would be good for Rhode Island if you had a ballpark that had private benefits and had public benefits. And so if you take a look at a setting, if there's a picture of this setting, rare is the opportunity to take a parcel of downtown land that is not developed, that has the capacity to become a catalyst for redevelopment. And that's what you're starting with, is take baseball, great starting point, now take year-round activities, better, and create something that's more than a ballpark. A baseball club and a ballpark have the opportunity to draw people to an area.
and then to invigorate it if it's well located and if it's well designed. And so that's what you're starting with, is what would be good for the people of Rhode Island? What would be good for people from all 39 cities and towns? And what would also bring people from the rest of New England? And that's really the starting point. And that's why it's a discussion that really begins now.
Okay, let's get Victor Matheson from Holy Cross in on the discussion. Of course, it's hard to talk about this without knowing precisely what the Paw Sox are asking for, if they are still seeking a public subsidy, and what level. But the thinking all along has been that the I-195 district in Providence, it's a former highway that's been cleared of the highway. It's now being targeted for growth companies and high-wage jobs. How do you, without being able to talk in the specifics about the dollars and the public subsidy, how do you see a ballpark fitting into this land? Could it be an important contributor to revitalizing this area, or are there better uses for that land?
Well, so if you look nationwide and you look over the past 30 or 40 years at what's happened around the country when new stadiums have been built, we have a real mixed bag. We have some places where areas have been cleaned up, but there hasn't been a whole lot of new economic development around that. Actually, Camden Yards is a good example of this, where we have, in Baltimore, home of the Orioles, that area beforehand, a very rundown sort of area, and now we have a beautiful new ballpark there. It's a fantastic fan experience, but actually hasn't led to a ton of economic development in the area. And so that's kind of your middle of the road idea. San Diego, where Charles has also been, is the example of kind of the best of what can happen, where Petco Stadium there is used as an anchor for local development and has served essentially as basically a gateway for an entire new entertainment area there, known as the Gas Lamp. And then you have your terrible economic development stories, and those stories, unfortunately, are far too many to name all of them at one, but one example, a stadium built exactly the same time as Camden Yards is the new Comiskey Stadium in southern part of Chicago. And that's a stadium that essentially is a walled fortress surrounded by a moat of parking lots where you're designed to drive all of the economic activity inside the stadium, nothing for the surrounding areas. And lo and behold, it's a great revenue generator for the White Sox, but a terrible generator for the neighborhood as a whole. And if you're going to put public money in, it should not be something that's generating economic activity just for private owners.
Let's get Jack Robbins in on the discussion here. Jack, you're an expert on urban planning. You've had a look at some of the early ideas for the 195 district. What is your thinking on whether a Paw Sox AAA minor league ballpark would complement or undermine efforts to redevelop that area?
Well, I think the key to redeveloping that area is about creating a mixed-use environment, and I think that a stadium can work as part of that, but I think it's hard to do. There are a lot of challenges in doing that. Is it a great place for a stadium? I think from a baseball point of view, it's a great location. I think the question really is, for the city, is that what the city wants to be there? And it shouldn't be sort of stadium or no stadium. It's stadium or spending an equal amount of public monies and effort in putting something else there and doing other kinds of development. And that's really what needs to be weighed in this decision.
Let's get a brief reaction to that from Dr. Charles Steinberg. What about that? Wouldn't a ballpark detract? That would take land that might otherwise go to companies that have some good jobs possibly.
What you find, if you do it well designed in the right place, is that you wind up having partnerships with hospitals, with the educators. We have phenomenal education institutions in this area. Which I actually agree so much with what Victor was saying. I probably am a little bit more favorable about the business development around Camden Yards, although that was organic. In San Diego, since we knew that businesses pop up, it was very orchestrated and enormously successful. I agree with you about, was it U.S. Cellular, you know? And the joy comes from having a ballpark that is integrated into its community, that's integrated, say, into this innovation district, that is a catalyst that brings the other businesses that you're talking about. But what's unique about baseball is the number of times it brings the number of people to an area and the hours that it brings them. What you like to have when you find yourself having a vibrant new neighborhood is something that's animated not only 9 to 5 and is a bit of a ghost town at night. That's not necessarily your victory. But if you have a place that people are during the day and people are during the night, and if you partner with the medical professions, as you see in Boston, where Fenway Park is down the street from Longwood Medical Center, you wind up having vibrance morning, noon, night, overnight, and that creates a sense of youth and vitality that really gives, a vibrance to a new kind of neighborhood.
Jack Robbins, what do you think about what Charles Steinberg is saying? Does he have a good point there?
I think it can be done. I think the devil is in the details of how it's done. I think that, one of the questions that I would have is, are there other sites? Was there a site selection process? I know from the work, the study that I did of the area, there's a lot of underused or vacant land in the area. Yes, this land is owned by the state so that a deal can be made with the state, but are there other options? And I think, again, that's what the city needs to look at, is not just is this a good location, but is this the best location?
We're running toward the end of our first segment, so I'm going to ask the panel to make slightly shorter questions because we have a lot of ground to cover. But I want to toss this back to Charles Steinberg. We've all been familiar with the success of the New England Patriots. Gillette Stadium in Foxborough was built with private money. The state of Massachusetts did do some infrastructure improvements. If the Patriots can privately pay for their own stadium, should the Paw Sox be able to do likewise?
I think it goes back to a question that we mentioned before, or a topic that I hope gets fleshed out over the course of the summer. There are private benefits to having a ballpark. There are public benefits as well. And if we, over the course of time, examine those and say, what would be good? Would it be good to be bringing 1 million people year-round, not just during the baseball season? We're talking about a ballpark that would have multiple uses, that would have football games as well. If you have a place, and it could have concerts, it can have, other events, theatrical events. If you have a place that brings people, that is a magnet, that is a beacon, that is a source of pride, are those public benefits of value to you? And one of the questions that we ask is it a better place to live? Is it a healthier city? Is it a healthier state? And that's an approach that you can take that will ultimately lead you to your answer.
Victor Matheson, you've said that a large multiplex theater can generate about a similar level of traffic as a AAA ballpark. What do you think about the argument that Charles Steinberg is making?
Well, there's certainly no doubt that bringing a large number of people to your city has some distinct advantages. But again, the question is, should public money be put into this? And we can take a look at other things that money could be put into as well. Again, a 16-screen multiplex, not that anyone's particularly suggesting that for this site, but that generates a lot of traffic as well, and that really is something that's literally 365 days a year. What we see in baseball stadiums is, I think the chances for external events is generally highly speculative. We don't see that many concerts going into these. The baseball stadiums are pretty poorly designed for things like soccer, things like lacrosse, things like football. So you're probably not going to see particularly many events here. So what you're going to see is a facility that would be a fantastic facility 70 days a year, but most of those other days a year, you're going to have a little bit more difficulty making that a vibrant area.
And the Paw Sox have said that in addition to about 72 baseball games a year, they would plan on roughly about 30 other events or so, possibly scholastic football. Dr. Steinberg?
Well, I think you have scholastic football, you have scholastic baseball, you also have, it's really only limited by your imagination to say, what can you do when the weather is pretty and when the weather is wintry here. It may be difficult, but that's the experience that our group does bring. They've done difficult projects really well that have succeeded, but the design in your mind is to do something that is a year-round beacon. That's the win would be if it's a win for Rhode Island. That's what the taste of victory is, for people to come down year-round, day and night, and then you have this area. If you do the multiplex, I rarely see people come and picnic outside a multiplex before the movie.
Charles Steinberg, we have about a minute left, but I'm going to bring up a question that Jack Robbins raised. There is a property owner in an area called Victory Square, about maybe a quarter mile, half mile from your intended Paw Sox location. It's not on the river, but it is privately owned. It's not part of the 195 land. If all other things were equal, would the Paw Sox consider building there?
I'm sure that I don't know that answer. What I would tell you is, when I take a look at the scene, and I know for folks listening on radio can't see this picture, but you have this, this beautiful asset, this natural asset. And if you imagine a river walk, if you imagine a left-handed hitter hitting a 380-foot home run and splashing into the river, and you picture moms and dads and 8-year-olds that are sitting along the river or in the right field areas, believing that they're going to catch the ball, that's a pretty compelling, romantic sight.
We're going to take a quick break, and I'd ask our audience to keep it together. Coming up, a look at why attendance has been on the decline at McCoy Stadium in Pawtucket. I'm Ian Donnis, and you're listening to a public forum on Rhode Island Public Radio, and we're recording in front of a live audience here at Brown University's Taubman Center. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're listening to Public Forum on Rhode Island Public Radio. We're doing it in concert with Brown University's Taubman Center. Joining me to discuss the Pawtucket Red Sox is Boston Red Sox Senior Executive Charles Steinberg, architect and urban planner Jack Robbins, and sports economist Victor Matheson. The Paw Sox current home, McCoy Stadium in Pawtucket, is known for cheap ticket prices and family-friendly entertainment. Yet despite that, attendance has been declining at McCoy for a number of years, and the Paw Sox say they need a new ballpark to attract more fans. Victor Matheson, is that a compelling argument? If the Paw Sox get a new ballpark, will that be a sustainable way of boosting attendance?
Well, so what I would say is, if the Paw Sox say they need a new stadium, I think that's probably the incorrect word. The Paw Sox want a new stadium, and we do have lots of evidence to suggest that a new stadium would in fact increase attendance. For roughly a decade, there's a honeymoon period for new minor league ballparks that are built, about 10 years, and it also allows folks to not only sell more tickets, but also increase the prices of those tickets that are sold. So again, by experience, we'd see ticket prices go up by a couple bucks and attendance go up by several thousand. It is true that McCoy Stadium is in fact the oldest stadium in all of AAA or AA baseball, built in 1942. When it opened, it was the most expensive baseball stadium built in the United States. And so there is no doubt that there are all sorts of reasons to say, this is an older stadium. It doesn't generate the revenue that the team would like. And I fully encourage the team to go out and look for any opportunity to spend their own money building a stadium anywhere that they would like.
Thank you. Okay, let's get back to the discussion here. Dr. Charles Steinberg, the Red Sox play at Fenway Park. It was built in 1912. It's 103 years old by my poor arithmetic. What is prohibitive about keeping the Paw Sox at McCoy Stadium, and why would the team says it would cost $65 million to renovate it? Why would it cost so much money?
Those are a few questions, but let me tell you what I know. When we came to Boston in 2002, we had been in Baltimore with Camden Yards. We've been in San Diego with what later became Petco Park, and
I'm a little bit slow. I said to Larry Lucchino, are we going to try to build a new ballpark in Boston? He goes, no, have you learned nothing? You don't destroy the Mona Lisa, you protect the Mona Lisa. And the idiosyncratic nature and the joy and the beauty and the angles and the intimacy of the seats, everything about the Green Monster of Fenway Park was such an inspiration to him. It was one of the great inspirations for Camden Yards. There was a second dimension, and that was that Fenway Park does open to its neighborhood, does open to its community. And the owners invested heavily, ultimately $285 million of their private money over a 10-year period. But it was after that third year of renovations, of improvements, it was March 23rd, I believe, of 2005, that they declared, we now believe that Fenway can survive. And upon that declaration, you saw private investment in the Fenway neighborhood that has me renting the apartment I rent, that has restaurants and apartments and condominiums that have reinvigorated and revitalized that area. So the setting of Fenway Park was part of the degree to which it was a jewel unto itself. What I think you've seen is that in Pawtucket, you have McCoy, which I was there last night. I love going down. And it is like my memorial stadium of my childhood. It's set in a residential neighborhood. I wouldn't say that it has been a catalyst for commercial development in its area. There is a restaurant across the street, but a new ballpark would do more for an area if it opens up to the ballpark. It opens up to the neighborhood.
Yeah, what you're saying, although they're maybe 7 miles apart, there is a difference in what kind of neighborhood you have between downtown Providence and the area around where McCoy Stadium is in Pawtucket. Jack Robbins, I'd like to ask you about that. There is still a lot of affection for McCoy Stadium. There are a lot of people in Rhode Island who would like to see the Paw Sox stay there. Charles Steinberg and the Paw Sox say the team needs a new ballpark to stimulate more interest and attract more fans. But is that a significant difference, that on one hand you've got a downtown center in Providence where there are other attractions versus whereas McCoy Stadium now is in a somewhat barren industrial / residential area? What do you make of the What do you make of the distinction between those two different locations?
Well, I'm not familiar with the existing stadium, so I can't really comment on that. But what I will say is that I'm sure that there are potentials for synergy in the downtown location, and I think that everyone would acknowledge that. But how you realize those potentials is tricky. And again, is that the best thing for the city? It might be the best thing for the team. It might be the best thing for attendance. It might increase those, but you have to look at the larger picture. We talk about Fenway, and the economic boom that happened didn't just happen because of the ballpark that was there. It had transportation, it had open space, it had other kinds of development investment. So you have to look at the big picture, and that big picture in a city like Providence is an incredibly complicated thing, and you have to be careful. I mean, we'd all love to be at that stadium on an evening like tonight watching a ball game. Baseball does this. It's the great American sport. It tugs at our heartstrings. But you have to make decisions of that magnitude based on something more than just tugging on the heartstrings.
Dr. Steinberg, I'll give you a chance to add another comment. Is fun with microphones. But I do want to bring in public sentiment. As you know, there has been a generally negative reaction to at least the Paw Sox initial proposal. And I'd like to read you part of an email that we got from a listener named Mike, and his view seems typical of many of the critics of the Paw Sox proposal. He says making a wise choice about the use of the I-195 land is critical to the long-term future of Providence. Building a stadium seems unwise on so many levels, yet I fear a decision that benefits the few at the expense of the many. And Mike says that he thinks a stadium will mainly create low-paying seasonal jobs while eliminating the public park plan for the site. I know that's a lot to chew on, but how would you respond?
Well, there were some things in there that I agreed with, but what I would suggest to you is this. I don't know that I'm aware of what is an independent magnet that draws people to it year-round, especially day and night, in partnership with other businesses, the way a ballpark does. I'm not sure what does that more than a ballpark. The jobs are real. You may have some wages that are modest, but you're going to have wages that are thoroughly livable too. This is what you have found when the ballpark is well designed, when it is well located, and it does become a catalyst for redevelopment. And we talked about San Diego. I remember there was a Dodgers-Padres telecast, and Vin Scully from Petco Park was looking through the cameras at what was going on around, and he said, they're building condominiums in this neighborhood like they just invented the concept. So it becomes a full-fledged, real, beautiful neighborhood. And that's what a parcel of land like this apparently can do. And it's up for discussion. And that's why this is really the beginning. This is the beginning of the discussion. But I don't know if I addressed all of his comments. But I don't know that I've seen what works better, than a ballpark well done to bring that kind of life in partnership with hospitals and with businesses, and that which gives it day and night vitality.
Now, recently there was a early stage proposal for a life sciences complex on another parcel, part of the 195 land. Victor Matheson, what is your view of whether a ballpark would really, is there an argument to be made for the power of place, the kind of thing that Charles Steinberg is saying, that there's something distinctive and poetic about baseball on the riverfront in Providence, that it would be an attraction and help to raise Providence's stature? What do you make of that argument?
Well, there's certainly no doubt that this would be a very nice place for a ballpark. I think I would certainly enjoy going to a game there. But the real question is, should taxpayers be expected to pay for my enjoyment, or should I be paying for that ticket myself? Again, same thing with the owners. I think this would be a great place to make a lot of money selling me a nice ticket and a hot dog and a beer. But the question is whether the taxpayers should be subsidizing that business transaction between me and the Sox.
You mentioned something in the email about, or should this land be used for a park, which we love the concept of a park. Keep in mind that in the vision that is evolving, if you take a ball field and picture the size of a baseball field, what we understand is, in addition to that ball field, and in addition to the stands that surround it, there would still be enough room for a park surrounding this ballpark as part of the area that is equal in size to the square footage of the ball field. So you would be able to have a ballpark with a ball field and a surrounding park around it. We did something similar to that, perhaps a smaller park in San Diego, where we created what we called the Park at the Park. And it was in center field, and during the game, it's part of the ballpark, and families can sit there. I think the seat for $5. But when there was no game, it was a public park, and you could come and read a book, and people did. They would come and lounge the way you might say up in Boston on the Boston Common.
Okay, we've got it. Thank you. Jack Robbins, what do you say about a ballpark nonetheless would take some of the land that has otherwise been envisioned as a public park, and there's some critics of the Paw Sox proposal who are upset about that. How do you sketch out the difference in public value between a ballpark and a more traditional green park?
I think that there are two issues. One is a question of size, and is the park that would be built with the stadium large enough for the kind of growth and development that is envisioned and desired around it. And the other is programming. The numbers that I've heard of, $2 million to $4 million a year from the state, if you put that kind of money towards programming in a park, could you attract crowds? Maybe not as much as baseball, but you could make that a really excellent world-class park.
And let's toss it back to Victor Matheson. We know you're a critic of public subsidies for ballparks. Where do you draw the line between where do you define the line for what would be a fair deal both for the Paw Sox and for the taxpayers of Rhode Island? Is any subsidy would any subsidy justify the benefits of this project?
Yeah, so I'll point back again to the Patriots. Patriots Place is in fact a privately built stadium with lots of public money put in to make sure that there's adequate infrastructure to have people get there. So there is no doubt if a decision is made that the team wants to go ahead with a new ballpark in this area, that again, they're building themselves. Rhode Island should do everything they can to make it easy for businesses to do their business. They should make it easy for people to get to your businesses. That's what government is for, is to make it easy for businesses and customers to come together. So I wouldn't have any problems whatsoever with significant public money going into infrastructure, making sure there's adequate road, public transportation access there, and certainly making it so that there's this nice park space around this. And I'm personally not particularly concerned about the loss of parkland, because there are some nice pieces, just like Charles says, where you can combine some public space along with a private space. But again, I think that stadium itself, that should be money that they're spending their own money on that stadium.
Let's touch briefly on parking. The Paw Sox say with plans for 2 nearby garages and public parking spaces, there would be more than adequate parking for people coming to Paw Sox games in the evening on weekends. But there tends to be some skepticism about that view in Rhode Island. There are some roads are blocked off for water fire, and we get a little cranky when we can't find a parking space in Rhode Island. What can you say to assure people that there is, in fact, enough parking if this idea goes forward?
I think that what I've heard so far anecdotally from a lot of folks in Rhode Island is they want to use their cars and they want to drive their cars and they want to park their cars. And I've heard that there would be about 13,000 spaces, which would be enough in the surrounding area. But there's another part to this, and I've been told that some people are worried about, well, what about that out-of-town traffic that comes in? And today, I took the train down from Boston. Yesterday, I took the train down. And this location holds promise for so many people from outside of Rhode Island. I don't know if that's good news, but if for tourism, it's good news, to come into Providence. And it is so easy to just come in and get off that train, and you're going to walk to the park. And it's a new way to do it. I came from a city where we said, we're going to drive our cars. And when Larry Lucchino wanted Camden Yards to be downtown, I said, look, my parents are both gone now, but my parents were around then. I said, my parents aren't going to take a trolley downtown. They're not going to take a train. Streetcars went out in 1947. Well, sure enough, they did, because it was the easier way to go. When mom and dad are packing up the kids and you got to pack up the SUV and you're worried about where you're going to park and what happens if I want to leave early and how am I going to get to the car? And if instead you can hop on the train and get off and walk and you're at the park, what we have found with the new commuter rail stops that bring you right to Fenway Park, it's easier for families. You still have the parking spaces, but not everybody has to use the parking spaces.
To come back to Jack Robbins.
Yeah, if I could comment on that. I think that actually, one of the, for those of you in the audience here can see, there's a large parking garage shown right next to the stadium. And I would actually be very concerned about that, because that means that someone can drive in, go from the parking garage to the stadium, go from the stadium back to the parking garage, and never spend any additional money, not walk around city. I would actually put all the parking 2 or 3 blocks away. I know from the studies that I've done of the Julia District, there's actually lots of space for parking not right next to the stadium.
Victor Matheson, you've talked about how where the Chicago White Sox play keeps fans in and keeps the spending in. Do you think a Paw Sox ballpark in downtown Providence would spread spending through a wider area, or would it retain spending within and close to the ballpark?
Well, so the one of the problems with the nicer and nicer stadiums we're having all through both the major leagues and the minor leagues is all of the offerings you can get there. And of course, that's great for a team owner because you can offer lots of things to your fans when they get in, but it also offers less opportunities for the surrounding area. And again, if you're the Chicago Cubs, you're not in the business of trying to develop that neighborhood around you. You're in the business of selling that beer to that fan inside the stadium rather than outside. And so sometimes neighborhoods and teams are actually at cross purposes in these ways.
We need to take a quick break. Coming up, a look at the impact of the public backlash against the Paw Sox initial proposal. I'm Ian Donnis. You're listening to a public forum on Rhode Island Public Radio. We're discussing the future of the Pawtucket Red Sox, and we're recording in front of a live audience here at Brown University's Taubman Center. Thank you. Joining me is architect and urban designer Jack Robbins, Boston Red Sox senior executive Charles Steinberg, and sports economist Victor Matheson from Holy Cross College. And we're talking about the Paw Sox and the team's proposed move to Providence. Let's talk a little bit about the end game. There was a strong public backlash against the Paw Sox initial proposal. Dr. Charles Steinberg, is this going to make it impossible for Rhode Island politicians to support this proposal?
Well, I don't know that. But I know that what we'd like to do is say you have, 1,055,000 people in Rhode Island. And this may sound facetious, but it's the sincere intent. If we're meeting with, 200, 250 people tonight, let this be the beginning of a discussion statewide. And let there be participation in the discussion. Again, the last thing I wanted was someone coming and telling me what was good for me, And I thought that I liked what we had, but it turns out that a vision that I didn't have. I wanted, if you're going to make me have a new ballpark, I wanted something out in the suburbs. Well, it turns out that it wound up being beautiful, and that's why I had the zeal to convert and went out to San Diego and we did it there too. So I think if we just spend time talking to folks, we know that these are great Red Sox fans. When you're working inside Fenway Park, and we're at staff meetings, there is not a discussion about Boston fans and Massachusetts fans. If there is, in fact, it's Lucchino who has often said with vigor, the fans in Rhode Island are among our most passionate fans. And I may have met some of these folks, you'll tell me afterwards, when we've come down with the trophies and when we've come down for caravans, and there have been wonderful stories. I mean, we went to Warwick, Rhode Island in 2004. It was a story that I won't use all 19 minutes telling you, but we've had wonderful experiences with folks in Rhode Island who do profess a love of baseball, whether it's the Paw Sox or the Red Sox. And I think we would just like to engage everybody in the state in a good communal discussion. And we love representative government. Your electeds will make the decision that's best for Rhode Island, but that's what we'd like to see.
Let's go to Victor. Am I naive? The audience seems a little skeptical about the wisdom of their elected officials. Victor Matheson, how do you calibrate the impact on Rhode Island politicians of the sharp backlash against the Paw Sox initial proposal?
Well, I think the deal was probably handled somewhat poorly by the new owners. Again, these are owners that had only been around for a couple months when they announced, with fairly vigorously that they will not be staying under any circumstances up in Pawtucket. and then asking for a large handout. Again, owners that are brand new to the area asking for money immediately out of the gate, and then essentially kind of a veiled threat saying if we don't get what we want, boy, Springfield would be a beautiful place, and I hear Worcester is nice this time of year. And I think that went, it is. I'm from Holy Cross, yes. And I think that went over poorly.
Victor Matheson, does the negative reaction for the initial proposal make it less likely the Paw Sox will stay in Rhode Island?
I don't think they're moving, but the reason I don't think they're moving is I don't see the folks in Worcester. I don't see the folks in New Haven. I don't see the folks in Springfield ponying up huge amounts of money for a new stadium either. So remember, to move, you both have to want to go, but also you need somewhere to go.
Now, Jack Robbins, I get the sense that you're fairly neutral on the Paw Sox proposal, but you're as an urban planning expert, you must be sensitive to the impact of public opinion. It was recently reported that 98% of the communication to the governor's office here in Rhode Island was hostile to the Paw Sox initial proposal. How do you see that influencing politicians' behavior?
Well, I think that the reaction is good in the sense that it buys some time. I think that this is a proposal that needs to be studied, it needs to be examined, it needs to be studied by people who will look at it independently. You need to look at the traffic, you need to figure out if there is some other place that the stadium could go, if there's some other place that the park could go. And I think it's important to have that discussion and that dialogue that you've mentioned, and to let that have enough time to really find what the best solution is, both for the team and the city.
Charles Steinberg, we seem to be hearing a lot of skepticism on the part of our audience tonight about the merits of the Paw Sox proposal. What is your pitch to the skeptics out there on why this is a good thing?
I don't blame you. I was you. It's that's why you describe it as a beginning. It took me a while to come around to the idea of a downtown ballpark, and I fully understand that. And I don't disagree with that being a starting point. What I have the perspective of, the difference, the experience of, and what Larry Lucchino clearly has the experience in, is seeing what success looks like.
All right, let me ask you about that, because you're a lifelong baseball guy. Tell us about the track record of AAA ballparks elsewhere in the country. Would you argue that in terms of new AAA ballparks, the record is more one of success, or those projects not living up to their advanced billing?
You're hearing good things about Durham, about El Paso, about Indianapolis. There's maybe 7 or 8 that the Providence Foundation did a great and thorough study. We haven't built a AAA ballpark before, but no one had built a ballpark like Camden Yards before. And when we went to San Diego, I wondered whether it was going to be like or look like Camden Yards. And Larry taught, no, that's not the point. The point is not for it to be red brick and green steel everywhere you go. The point is for it to look and feel and smell and taste like its city. So Petco Park looks nothing like Camden Yards, and it resonates beautifully in San Diego. So what you want to do is perhaps build something that hasn't been built before. We're not ones to say, oh, here was US Cellular, let's build it like that. In fact, when the architects at the time brought Lucchino the model of their first proposal for Camden Yards, they were using what is now called US Cellular as the example. HOK was making both. Larry started to break the model. He started to rip it. And they said, do you know how expensive this model is? Do you know how expensive it would be to undo the ballpark if you build it this way? So there is innovation, there's imagination, there's a new kind of ballpark that is more than a ballpark, that is multi-purpose, that does have a design with football in mind too, that does have a design for lacrosse in mind too, that does have in mind clubhouses or locker rooms for your scholastic participants or your college participants.
Okay, we get it. And let's get Victor Matheson in. Is Charles Steinberg talking about something realistic in terms of a new, different kind of minor league ballpark that's an economic catalyst, or is this a unicorn?
Well, so look, we've seen some good examples of parks that really have been built well into the urban landscape. The most recent one in the International League, where the Paw Sox play, is in Charlotte. That's a new ballpark, and there's been all sorts of new development right around that. Of course, what's going on there is that's a ballpark built at the same time that light rail has gone through the exact region where that ballpark is as well. And so, is this a ballpark that is generating development, or is this a ballpark that is benefiting from the fact that other smart general infrastructure decisions are being made by the folks down in North Carolina?
I've got an urban planning environmental issue that I think might be in Jack Robbins' wheelhouse, so I'm going to ask him about it. The Providence Journal reported last month on how a Paw Sox ballpark on the I-195 land could unravel 2 years of work by multiple state agencies to create a master environmental permit. The idea is that this master environmental permit would help to make other development easier to proceed with. So how do you parse out the value of that master environmental permit versus a possible AAA ballpark?
Yeah, it's certainly an issue that will have to be addressed if the ballpark goes ahead. My understanding is that the park site was designated to be the sort of collection point for all of the stormwater in the area. So that, along with various other environmental studies that have been done and zoning and permits that have been based on that environmental work, would need to be redone. I don't know the details of the process here and how much that would entail. I don't think that should be the basis for deciding whether to do this or not. It really has to be a question of whether it's a good thing for the city. If it is a good thing for the city, there are ways to solve those problems. The same kind of creativity that's being talked about in the design of ballparks can be applied to the design of infrastructure to solving environmental issues as well.
Charles Steinberg, I know this issue is a little bit in the weeds, but would you want to weigh in on whether that master environmental permit, whether the Paw Sox would strive to incorporate that in some other way or make up for it?
Well, I'm sure I don't know that answer either, and I'm looking over at Jeff White, who's here, and I don't know if I was dial a lifeline to give you the answer. But so I don't know that answer. And maybe you want to stop me before I go off.
That's fine. I know that, as I said, I knew that issue was a bit obscure and a bit in the weeds. One other question raised on the economic front is whether going from Pawtucket to Providence would merely be a transfer of jobs, transfer of wealth without really stimulating something new. What do you say to that, Charles Steinberg?
Well, I think that if you were looking at this as an independent, inert ballpark that operated 72, 74 times a year, you would at least have the basis for an argument. That's not this point. That's not this idea. That's not this vision. This vision is to use, look, I love baseball. I fully admit that. I'm very proud of our game when the game of baseball and the architecture of a well-designed ballpark can turn what would have been a 70 or 72 use facility into a year-round destination and venue unto itself, and something that spawns the businesses around it. This would be an altogether different flavor of ice cream.
Do you agree, Victor Matheson?
No, look, Charles is right. If you have the stadium does in fact cause all sorts of local neighborhood development, then that's right. But otherwise, you really are talking about relocating jobs 5 miles. Not that that's the worst thing in the world, but it's not a great thing for $85 billion of taxpayer money.
Let's talk briefly about the initial part of the initial request. It was for a 30-year tax exemption in Providence. Providence needs more tax revenue. Dr. Steinberg, we hear these kind of requests are pretty common in minor league baseball. Is that your view, and does that justify it?
I don't think it's any longer relevant, because I think you are starting over. You're starting from scratch. There is a reset. There is a new beginning. And I you know, everything I've heard, I haven't met the governor, but everything I've heard is that, you know, she is a brilliant person. The process through which what I've heard is that there is also a top-notch Tier 1 team that she's assembled to negotiate with Lucchino, who is a very competent negotiator. And the desired end is a fair agreement. The desired end is something that is a victory for Rhode Island. That's why you do it. And so I just have faith that bright people together will be able to craft an agreement that is designed to be good. That's what our success has been elsewhere.
When will we hear more details on the revised proposal from the Paw Sox?
I don't know.
Let's go to Jack Robbins. You're an urban planning expert. People can speculate about whether the Paw Sox initial proposal was deliberately way up here so it could be scaled back to something that would attract more public support. Do you have any suggestions for the citizens of Rhode Island and how they should look at this process moving forward?
I think there are two things I would say. One is that make sure that you're asking the right question. And again, for me, I think the question is not whether there should be a stadium or not, but what's the best place for a stadium to go, and what's the best use for this piece of land. And if those two things align, great. The other thing I would say, and as I think I said this before, is that the devil is in the details, and you have to pay very close attention to exactly how the stadium is designed, how the area around it is designed. Do they work together? Is there retail facing the street, retail that's going to be active year-round, not just when there's a game on? Where is the parking? How do people get from the parking to the stadium? What other transportation options are there? All of these things. It's not a quick answer. It's not an easy answer. It's complicated. It takes a lot of work and a lot of study.
Charles Steinberg, you wanted to add something?
A short thing. When we were designing Petco Park, there was this big poster, and I don't think Lucchino knows to whom it's attributed, but it was a big poster, and it said, "God is in the details." And that was exactly it. We agree with you wholeheartedly that the details have been what have made the ballparks so fun to design, and then so rewarding to see the animation of the area around them. It is all in the details. A well-designed ballpark in the right location that does the most good for the people. That's what you love.
And I just should say that you could have a well-designed ballpark in the right location that does all of those things, and the financial deal can still not be a good deal. It's both sides of it.
And that's where my faith is. My faith is that between the governor and Lucchino, they're bright people. It's within the wit of mankind to get a good agreement done.
Victor Matheson, we know you don't have a better crystal ball than anyone, but where do you see this going? Do you think it's possible the Paw Sox might eliminate their request for a public subsidy or come in with a request for a very low public subsidy?
I can't obviously answer that. I will say that 80% of minor league ballparks, almost all minor league ballparks have been publicly financed with roughly 80% of construction costs being covered by the public, and almost every minor league park is exempt from property tax. But that does not mean that that is what should be done. That is simply what is done. I would at the very least, hope for a situation where you have a very minimal public contribution with lots of room to negotiate about how much property tax maybe this new facility should pay.
And this process has been playing out behind closed doors. People from the Paw Sox have suggested they don't want to negotiate this in public. Is it realistic to think that there could be a more open process, or not so much?
There's lots of things to be done in the negotiation level behind closed doors, but when the actual deal comes out, there better be some transparency and there better be some time for the public to be able to voice concerns and have that come out. We better not see, and this is the one thing I will personally say, is we better not see we have now signed a deal and this is what it is. I think that is a disservice to Rhode Island. Whether it's no money or lots of money, I think that would be a disservice.
Final word, Charles Steinberg.
Final word, I think, would be investment. I hear you say public subsidy. That's not the point. The point is, oh, no. Well, you asked for the final word.
Very short on time, Dr. Steinberg.
No, it's true. There are public benefits. There are private benefits. There are public benefits. There is private investment. There is public investment.
10 seconds.
Let's do 9, 8. Let's just do what's good for Rhode Island. I believe we can do that.
Our time is up, so we have to say goodbye. Thank you to our panel, Charles Steinberg, Victor Matheson, and Jack Robbins. Thank you to Marissa Quinn and Jim Marone and everyone at the Taubman Center and Brown University, our interim general manager at Rhode Island Public Radio, Susan Greenhalgh, and our interim news director, Elizabeth Harrison, chief engineer, Aaron Reed, and you, our audience. You've been a great audience. Please give yourself a hand.
I'm Greg Garrett. I live here in Providence. I do consulting around the ecology-economy interface. And after Piketty's book, it's pretty hard to argue that anything that increases inequality is actually good for communities. And clearly, a subsidy from the public to the very wealthiest of people has to be harmful to communities. Why would you try to sell us on this?
All I can tell you is we talked before about baseball being affordable family entertainment. And I know there was talk that, oh, what happens when you build a new ballpark and there are prices that go up and such. We're actually talking about lowering some of the prices. We have a plan named in memory of Ben Mondor, whom I was fortunate enough to know too and loved, where we actually take the prices that currently are at the lowest at $9 and you take them down to $8. You want to do something that is for the families of all backgrounds, of all parts of Rhode Island, of all socioeconomic groups. It's so wonderful to me when baseball unifies a community and brings everybody together. I think you've seen that before, with some of our other work. And so when you talk about how you mutually invest to make Rhode Island bigger, there's a way to do that well. There's a way to make sure that you have baseball in Rhode Island where it does good and brings people from all backgrounds, because the joy is seeing that 8-year-old from that town and that 12-year-old from that town with dreams in their eyes. We have the draft going on right now. And you get so excited when somebody has made it. That's if you are a good player. For those of us who got 2 hits in 2 years of Little League, it was just enough to love the game. And I think the equality is actually what we strive for. We want everybody to enjoy this.
Let's go to a question over there.
Fred Rickey from Cranston, Rhode Island. I love the dreams. The picture's beautiful. And I'll try to make this a question. It just seems preposterous we're having this discussion without the numbers.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of time for numbers, but I don't have those, and especially with it being started anew. But I think there is the first question. If you decide that you want something and you go to the store to buy it and you then see, well, do I want to pay this or do I pay that? You can get into that discussion so that you know what you're buying. But here's the first question. Do you see this as an idea that has merits for a way to have baseball as a catalyst for redevelopment in an area of land that holds promise.
Yeah, hi, I'm Peter Van Erp. I live in Providence. The late Mr. Skeffington spoke quite a bit about his fondness for the Durham Bulls ballpark in Durham and all the economic development that happened around it. Now, Durham is a part of North Carolina, the Research Triangle, which has 3 major cities in them: Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. Each has a major university. If the ballpark was actually generating economic development, Durham should be outpacing the 2 other cities. Is it?
Okay, so I can answer that. When economists, again, economists not associated with teams or leagues, go back and actually look at cities that have either built new stadiums, had new teams that have relocated. When we look at when baseball disappears because of a strike or a lockout, when we actually go back and look at economic indicators, the economists who look at this, we can almost never find any economic impact associated with spectator sports. It's one of the reasons that economists are almost in complete agreement about, at least when you're talking about region-wide benefits from sports, we are almost in complete agreement that there's very little in terms of direct economic benefits region-wide from sports. And if you can get a bunch of economists to agree on something, that's actually fairly remarkable. Mind you, there are some clear examples of local neighborhood development, and those are clear and obvious. But when you're talking about using a ballpark for wider development outside a several block area, we generally don't see that when we're looking, again, across all stadiums, all sports, all years. We just simply don't see that.
Question over here.
Given that some of the public value that could be generated from a ballpark has also been seen in places that are green spaces that are well programmed, like Millennium Park in Chicago, and others. I'm wondering, from an urban planning perspective, what you can offer about what the city might lose if we lose this downtown green space that we couldn't regain someplace else in the city.
I think it's important for a mixed-use environment, for the kind of lifestyle, for the kind of residents, the kind of companies that the city wants to attract and retain to have park space and to have open space. I think that one of the questions that needs to be looked at is, if the stadium is built in this location, is there another location for the park? Is the park that goes with the stadium enough? I've seen the plans, the designs for the park and for the pedestrian bridge. I think it could be great, but there are lots of ways to do that. There's not just one way, and it is a really essential piece of a thriving downtown.
But let me follow up, and I don't like being the dour economist all the time, so let me be the pro-baseball guy for just a moment, in that the idea that parks can be an attractor to people that make communities vibrant, exciting things for people to do also make communities vibrant. And a famous quote by Hubert H. Humphrey, who the Metrodome was named after, where the Twins played for many years. He said, without professional sports, Minneapolis is just a really cold Omaha. Look, there's certainly some element here that Charles is saying that, look, having baseball in Providence is something that makes Providence a much more livable place. And of course, having baseball in Pawtucket, just the same sort of thing, makes the greater Providence area a more livable space. The question is, how much are we willing to pay to get that? My sense is that, look, you in Rhode Island can pay anything you want, but be very focused on, you should be doing this because this is an amenity for the city, much less than this is something that's going to make everyone rich. Baseball does, we have some evidence that baseball makes us happy, but not as much that it makes the typical person rich.
You keep on saying that you want to have a discussion. Would you then support a public vote on this issue?
I also mentioned that I believe in representative government. Call me old-fashioned. But what you like to do is, what are there, 39 cities and towns? We'd like to just have a discussion with people and go to it.
But I think that there are those who devote their lives to learning these issues and representing us. And I'm again old-fashioned in my belief of representative government, but I do think that it should be something that is fully, not just fully vetted, but fully experienced by people. Because every concern that gets mentioned gets integrated into the discussion. When we were designing the ballpark in San Diego, we had sessions, we called them California Dreaming sessions, and fans would say what they wanted to have, and they might say what they were concerned about. Well, that influenced the design. That made it a better ballpark. And so that's what I think is the fun part of participation.
My name is Melissa, and I'm a student here at Brown. My question is more on the urban planning perspective. Mr. Steinberg, you mentioned that around 45% of attendees come from the South Coast of Massachusetts. I'm personally from the South Coast, and I know that there's no direct transportation connection to this area, so it would be entirely dependent on car travel, and also the culture here in Rhode Island is very dependent on traveling by cars, which means that the majority of people that would be coming to the stadium would be in their vehicles. So my concern is particularly for the congestion that the stadium would cause in this area, especially when it's located right next to the center of RIPTA, which is very dependent on their schedules.
We see the train being a vital role for people outside Rhode Island. It is now.
The train doesn't connect to South Coast Massachusetts.
Well, I won't tell you that. I'm going to tell you where everybody gets on. There are people who are coming down the Amtrak, whether you get on in Boston at South Station or at Back Bay Station or at 128. And one of the things that Jim Skeffington, may rest in peace, had said was, you can build a Taj Mahal and put it in Pawtucket, you still can't get there by train. And when you have, I believe there's a multimodal or intermodal station here, you'd want it to be that you diversify and not make it all dependent on cars. That's part of what makes it a win. What I would do is take from your suggestion the reminder that we do want to make sure there are alternate ways, multiple ways to get to a ballpark and get to a neighborhood safely during the day, get home at night. Some of the ways that you go to Fenway Park now, you couldn't do 2 years ago. It's a 103-year-old ballpark, and we've changed that now.
Transportation connections like Boston does. Boston has the Green Line. I personally lived by Fenway last year, so I know that a lot of people that got there, they got there through walking, they got there through the Green Line. Providence, people aren't very reliant on the RIPTA. People would be driving in from South Coast Massachusetts. Everyone would be driving in, and that would cause about 90% of that consider a lot of people who would be coming in.
I don't know whether 5 years ago in Boston there was the vision that you could supplement the Green Line with the commuter rail that comes in from the western suburbs, but you have that now. And it was there were 17 stops, and you had to flag the stop, and now it's 44 perhaps times that it now stops. There are visions of change that we can do, and I think that if living on the area you describe is one that merits that, then let's take a look at that. But let's not pretend that the trains that connect people in the Northeast corridor of the United States aren't a wonderful source of transportation to come from elsewhere in New England. I know a lot of us who come down from Boston. It's just the most convenient way to come down. But let's expand that.
Another question over here. Let's go to this gentleman.
Peter McClure. I'm very concerned about the idea that this is an old salesman's trick. We're only talking about this one location with this one group of owners wanting it there. There's no openness to the discussion. You say, okay, we'll renegotiate. We're not renegotiating, as you had suggested, of other locations and other uses. Why are we not discussing, if we're going to have these long discussions over a considerable period of time, other locations, other uses for the land, and not just be focusing on a yes or no for this stadium, which the owners apparently don't want to talk about anything else. But if they're going to be discussing and open for negotiation, location and the uses of the land should be, in my mind, as you were suggesting, sir, part of the discussion.
I would certainly imagine that the parcel that you want to use is the one that Rhode Island deems is best for Rhode Island. And I think that that's the approach you take.
Hello, Dr. Steinberg. I'm Charlie Bax, and I'm open-minded on the stadium. I live in Grandstand Section 32 at Fenway Park. Actually, I live a mile from here. I'm a Brown alumnus, and this question really relates to Brown. And that is, I keep hearing that Brown wants the stadium, the football games to be played there and whatnot, and maybe that's a great idea. I'm open-minded about that too. But I want to know if Brown is interested in doing this, how much are they paying toward the cost of the stadium? And what would happen to the current Brown Stadium property?
Well, once again, it's easy. I have no idea.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's true. I don't know.
Just let me say, maybe I've missed something. I haven't seen any real substantial discussion about this. And as people try to get their brains around what you're proposing, that's something people are going to want to know.
Well heard.
If I could just answer that briefly, Charlie, thanks for the question. Brown doesn't have a position on it. Brown doesn't want the stadium. We are trying to get our minds around this as well. We are neutral. We're into the discussion. If we once we make a decision, we'll certainly have everybody know about it, but it's very much under conversation at Brown. And at Brown, the conversation will be open, it'll involve every bit of the Brown community, and it'll go on for some time. So no decisions yet, no position yet.
And I'd just like to add in that is that if it were to be used as a football stadium, if this baseball stadium were to be used by Brown for, again, soccer, football, any of these other things, that would very, very much go against the grain of what's gone on in all of stadium economics over the past 2 decades, where multi-use stadiums have disappeared because baseball and every other rectangular sport simply doesn't share facilities very well. And look, Charles is well-meaning to say, hey, we'll try to use these things for as many things as we can, and there's no doubt that they will try to use them for many things as they want. Unfortunately, baseball just simply does not share very well just because of the nature of the sport. Again, Fenway Park does a very, very, Fenway Park obviously clearly does soccer games. Right. Fenway Park is obviously used for major soccer matches on regular occasions. That being said, it is used despite the fact that it's a terrible place to watch soccer, not because it's such an awesome place to watch soccer.
Yeah, I'll just concur with that. It's if you are doing multiple sports in different kinds of sports in a baseball stadium, it's compromised. It can work, but it's not ideal.
Hey, hang on. We're having people walk up to the microphones. We're not having a debate back and forth between the audience. So let's go to this woman over here, please.
Terry Devine. So my question, I don't know the economics of baseball, all right? And one question, there's been a lot of discussion about families coming to baseball games, right? And I do know that the times that I've gone to see the Paw Sox, I've been up there a couple of times. I'm a New Yorker, and I've been to the Staten Island Yankees, and we lived, on the line going to the Brooklyn Cyclones. When we went, we paid next to nothing. They were fundraisers for school. My daughter got to go because she read 6 library books here. And we happen to know the former owner of the Paw Sox. So the bottom line, though, is that as a family activity, it's very appealing because it's cheap. And the question I have is that if the team is going to pay for the stadium, all right, how are you going to make those numbers work without a heavy public subsidy? Because I can tell you that the Staten Island Yankees and the Brooklyn Cyclones had very heavy subsidies. And so I'm wondering how those numbers are going to work. And if you were to tack on the cost of taking public transportation to a game, I mean, those tickets, those train tickets are not cheap. So if you were to add that on, and then, and the food is at these AAA places, it's not like the Fenway. I mean, they basically give the food away as well. So can you address that, like how you make these numbers? I don't know the purpose of a AAA team, but my perception has always been it's a training ground. And, it's not the place where the team makes money. So if you could address the question of how do you make those numbers work and make it affordable for families?
I'll go first. I don't know if I know all the answers to your questions, but I'll tell you this. Start at the end of the story. It has to be, it's only successful if it works for moms and dads and kids. It has to work for families. That's your bread and butter. This is not one where you're going to lose that as your fundamental core. That's why the ticket prices have to remain affordable. That's why the food has to be. That's why you want it to be what we were talking about before. It's something that binds people from all over New England. I won't pretend that I'm an economist. I'm probably the opposite of that. But you've got to design it in a way that works for you, for the way you just described. That's how it works. And that's what we believe can be done. And that's why if there are private benefits, there are public benefits, there are ways to make sure that you've got a ballpark. And there are several functions for a minor league club, for a AAA club. It is a training ground for the Boston Red Sox. And it's also a business that makes ends meet. And it does do that, and it has done that. So you want those fundamentals, but the families are the key to not only survival, but to it flourishing. That's who you're building it for.
Are you intending to have corporate suites, or is that part of the plan?
You would have to tell me the market. You would have to tell me whether you want to supplement the bread and butter seats with suites that corporations will pay for. That depends on the market. I think when Cleveland built their ballpark, they had, 120 corporate suites, 3 rows of 40. Well, if that was your market and that's what allowed you to keep the seats very affordable, hey, knock yourself out. When we built Camden Yards, I believe our assessment of the market was about 40 of those. But to the degree that there is a market for those who want to have those suites, and if that revenue allows you to have something like the Mondor plan where you have $8 tickets, great, but you better know your market.
My name's David Kolsky. I run the neighborhood discussion group for Wayland Square. But my question is actually about comparing Pawtucket and Providence. So I guess it's directed to Dr. Matheson and Mr. Robbins. In my impression is that Pawtucket is on the brink of breaking out from a post-industrial slump. It has arts and restaurants and a lot of vitality. And my feeling is, and so that's why I want that the benefit to Providence, which already has lots of activity going on from moving the stadium, compared to leaving the stadium in Pawtucket, where it might make the difference, between Pawtucket being able to break out of a slump when it has international arts festivals and it has a lot of other activity, that might hurt Pawtucket much more than it would benefit Providence.
Okay, so that's a possibility. The one thing certainly you want to do as an economist is, if you're going to count the benefits that accrue to building a new stadium in Providence, you better also count the sort of costs that are going to be associated with Pawtucket losing that piece. If you're talking about Providence taxpayer money going into a stadium, that's one thing. But if you're talking about Rhode Island state taxpayer money going into something, you better be very concerned about the fact that really you are moving activity 5 miles down the road, and you better be considering the costs to Pawtucket if you're going to be considering the benefits to Providence.
Hi, my name is Joseph Palino, and I'm a Providence resident and an investor and property owner in the city. When this was first announced, I kind of scratched my head and said, gee, does this really make sense? Why don't they put it where the scrap metal yard is on Allen's Avenue and try to revitalize that area instead of seeing what we see every day. And then I drove down to the location. And then I parked the car and I just looked around. I saw the skyline of the city, everything that's been promoted. I said, wow, I get it. Because I started thinking that when the Providence Civic Center was first built back in the early 70s, it was done really for the Rhode Island Reds and now for the Boston Bruins and PC basketball and other great events that have been there. When Sinatra was there, Elvis was there, Springsteen, whatever. And it does add a lot to Providence. And when we, years ago, planned the convention center, it was specifically to try to put it in that area to complement the Civic Center. And we've seen so much good things happen with the Rivers and Capitol Center and other things. It's nice to see now somebody's paying attention to the other part of the city. And to Brown's credit, with them going into the jewelry district, they took an area that nobody wanted to invest in, and they're making that very valuable. So having that stadium there, I get it. What I don't get, yes, I'm not trying to do a commercial, Peter. What I don't get is how they came out with the financial thing, because that's what I think everybody is upset about, rightfully so. And I say to myself, gee, why don't they have the users pay for this? Example, when the Civic Center had the name of Dunkin' Donuts, the city gets $1 million a year. Why can't one of the banks or somebody pay $1 million a year and let that go towards it? Why can't they add $1 or $2 to the ticket? And again, let the users pay for it. I don't see it as all that complicated. And it's not only has been complicated, but it's become extremely divisive in the community, which it doesn't have to. This today, I applaud all of you, because having this discussion on both sides is really helpful. But this is a no-brainer. It's a beautiful stadium. I personally like the location, maybe others don't. But the financing of it could be done by a lot of reasonable people. But just to say we want everything and ask for everything, that's not going to go. But to sit down and go over it and let the users pay for it, I think it works. And I think it could be wonderful for not only Providence, but for the state.
It should be pointed out that if you make the users pay entirely for this, the approximate numbers is that you need to fill that stadium every single game of the year, completely fill it, and you have to have a user pay tax of roughly $8 or $9 a ticket. And there's where you've got the real problem, because you're talking about essentially doubling the price of the tickets, even if you throw in some naming rights and other things.
Well, I have to cut in for a moment, and you're the expert, I'm not. But if the Pawtucket Red Sox got 600,000 people, or 580,000 last year, and figure 600,000, maybe if they do some other games, maybe you get 700,000 people a year. $2 is $1.4 million. I think the owners have been looking for $5 million a year subsidy. If you get $1 million a year for naming rights, you're getting pretty close to taking care of that gap. So I think you kind of scare people when you say $9. I don't think you have to say that. I think if everybody wants everything to be affordable, make it affordable. If somebody's going to have a beer, maybe there's going to be an extra tax on the beer for 25 cents or 50 cents. But I believe that with what you have, see how close you can get to fill in the gap, and then see where we are after that.
Catherine Orloff from Providence, and kind of along the same lines that Mayor Paolino was. But this is directed to Dr. Steinberg. Many times this evening you've spoken of the fact that the stadium owned by the Pawtucket Red Sox is a private benefit, but it also has public benefits. And you've said that maybe 4 or 5 times. And I want to question the logic a little bit of it, because it seems to me that any time there's a private improvement in any area, and especially in a city, there's also a public benefit. So if I paint my house and re-landscape my yard, there's a private benefit to me, but there's also a public benefit on my street. My neighbors like to look at it better, the street looks better, et cetera. And so, but I think the undistributed middle, as they say in logic, in your argument is that because there's a public benefit to the private Paw Sox thing, therefore there's a public subsidy merited and owed. But I don't expect a public subsidy to fix up my house, and every small business that repairs or improves or expands, there's also a public benefit as well as their private benefit, but they do that all on their own. They pay for it themselves. So my question is, how do you logically jump to the idea that there's a public subsidy needed and deserved because there's this public benefit, which I say is with every private improvement?
I think that you would wind up looking at what all of the public benefits are, and you look at what the private benefits are, and then you look at what the corresponding investments are that are worthwhile to you. If it's not worthwhile, then you don't do it. If it is worthwhile, then you do it. When Victor was talking about U.S. Cellular, yes, that was a new ballpark, but it didn't spawn redevelopment. It did not create the critical mass that transformed or changed that neighborhood. It did not even showcase Chicago when you have your telecast and you like for a telecast to be a Chamber of Commerce commercial for your city. So there are varying degrees of benefits. And I think when you're talking about something that's multi-purpose, and by the way, Lucchino was the one who said baseball only when we built Camden Yards, so much so that he made sure that it was insufficient a distance from home plate out to center field for a football field to fit. But there is not this wisdom of dogma where we say one size fits all, where we say that which do for this, do for this. In Providence, in Rhode Island, it's a different set of circumstances. It's a different experience that people have had. And so what you want to do is say, what makes it work here? Well, if designing it with traditional baseball values, but with a cleverness and an ingenuity that makes it work well for football too, or for lacrosse, or for a James Taylor concert, well, then you're deriving a lot of benefits that go beyond baseball, because the point, and we will say this a lot, is that it's more than a ballpark. We believe that.
I'll just very quickly say, if the baseball stadium has a disproportionate public component versus private component, there is an economic justification for subsidy. My personal opinion is that the public component of baseball is not significantly larger than the public component of lots of businesses out there, and we would never think about building a movie theater for a movie theater chain, and we wouldn't think about building restaurants for restaurateurs, and we seem to kind of lose our head a little bit when it comes to America's pastime.
Thanks very much. You've been a great audience.